Good afternoon and welcome to another edition of UK Column Live from our Plymouth, England studios. It's just after 1 o'clock. It's the 22nd of August 2013 and the sun is shining in accordance with our weather forecast of yesterday. And we expect it to remain roughly the same over the next couple of days with possibly the odd shower or two. So good news for the weekend. Well, for national and particularly international news, we've got some fairly serious events happening, and of course Syria is a major article in most of today's press, which Patrick is going to cover in some detail. But just as an introduction here, this is just one article from The Guardian. Syria conflict, chemical weapons blamed as hundreds reported killed. Death toll claimed to be as high as 1,400. Syrian government admits launching offensive but denies using chemical weapons. Now, I'm just going to say here it's very interesting that The Guardian seems to be the sole newspaper that was able to up the numbers to 1,400. 1,300 seems to be the consensus. And one of the things that we're going to talk about today is the truth behind the reporting, the accuracy of the reporting, because we've got some fairly serious questions to ask. So this is one of the comments from that Guardian article. It's a quote from the Free Syria Army, Captain al-Bashir, who was saying that around 2:30 a.m. on Wednesday we received calls that basically chemical weapons had been used. They were asking for forces to evacuate the civilians as the shells were coming in around 5 a minute. As soon as my team and I arrived at the scene, we saw bodies, we saw whole houses. When I got there, I could smell what seemed to be burning sulphur and something like cooked eggs. The smoke was not pure white. Now, for me, this is a very interesting comment by this man, because if the shells were still coming in and they were full of chemical weapons, obviously more people were being put directly at risk. So something doesn't quite stack up here for me. And also, of course, we're consistently told that the main chemical being used is sarin gas, which has neither smell or odour. So I'm not quite sure what the second point is. Is this gentleman accurately reporting what he saw and smelt, or is the aim of this text to actually ramp up the idea that chemical weapons have been used? If we take a look on the Guardian website itself, obviously we're not alone in raising questions, and somebody here has posted how many stories about this does the Guardian intend to publish, especially when everyone complains about the shoddy journalism. And at the bottom a particularly pertinent comment where somebody is saying, sure, so Assad dumped sarin on rebel-held stronghold days after the UN arrive. And wait, news just in. Now, I think this person is really beginning to pick up on the heart of the matter here. Does it really make sense for Assad to use chemical weapons when he's now got a UN monitoring team on his doorstep? And we just remind people that UK Column, alongside 21st Century Wire and Patrick, of course, have been asking questions about what's really been going on in the British political establishment. And of course, we pointed out that Tory MP Brooks Newmark had been absolutely claiming that the use of chemical weapons in Syria was a fact. When we challenged him on the evidence for this, he was unable to provide it, and we were unable to find any evidence which was factual in proving that Assad had used chemical weapons. All of it was supposition, including reports coming from the UN. Now, I just wanted to cover this fairly hard-hitting topic here of what we're really dealing about when we're talking about chemical weapons in Syria. So I've taken from just one site some very basic facts about sarin gas. And of course, what it's saying is that it's really based on organophosphates used for insecticides. Very, very toxic, very, very dangerous if it's breathed or ingested, or indeed is taken in through the skin. Minute quantities can cause serious brain damage, and minute quantities can cause death. That's what it's designed to do as a chemical weapon. but very, very dangerous compound. And people should have the dangers behind these sorts of weapons in their minds when we think about what was happening on the ground in Syria and what we're being shown the so-called fact of an after-gas attack. And I'm also going to just pop this one up. This is VX. This is even more toxic than sarin. And if you read down through the facts about this gas, you'll see that VX was developed in the United Kingdom in the early 1950s. So if we get into the background of chemical warfare, of course, we start to find that the nations producing this product in the first place are within the Western and developed world. And we are dealing with some fairly serious things. Of course, if the military in Britain or the US or Europe have to deal with these kinds of weapons, this is the type of equipment that you have to have, not only a full respiratory system, but also all skin has to be fully covered. And of course, you have to have protective clothing that can deal with the gas. And my point here is, Patrick, that if sarin gas has been released in the quantities that we're being led to believe, people on the scene would have problems. And lastly, this man, Hamish de Bretton Gordon, is quoted in some of the dailies today. He's got a background in chemical warfare with the British Army, but he's now working with a private company, Secure Bio Limited. He's been fairly bland in his comments because he would, of course, know that if you use these weapons, the area and certainly the bodies themselves are going to remain highly toxic and highly dangerous. But he doesn't make any comment. For anybody who hasn't seen any details of this company, Secure Bio, you might be interested to go and have a look at it. They're very interested in risks from chemical and biological weapons across the world. This is their assessment of the world at the moment. And Europe painted red there, when including the Soviet Union, they regard as very high risk. Interestingly enough, the Middle East, in the area we're looking at,
moderate,
is only moderate.
Yes.
But really, over to you. This is the type of tragic headline that we're seeing at the moment, Patrick.
Well, this is what the majority of Britons would have woke up to this morning if they passed by their local newsstand. You would have seen 6 to 8 of these types of headlines. Now they're gassing our children. So it's already, they put the idea in the public's mind already that there's been poisonous gas used, and they've also put the children, which they've lined up there. And it's quite amazing how quickly the videographers and photographers got on the scene as the shells were falling. If it was indeed, like you said, a chemical weapons attack, quite extraordinary. But this is basically this is an identical PSYOP or identical propaganda campaign to what we saw before Libya in 2011 for that humanitarian intervention to save the children, save the women. And of course, we know now after Libya that was a lot of the reports that led to the public outrage for humanitarian intervention were in fact fabricated by even some of the major networks. Now, Iraq, 2003, is more identical to this because obviously it's prominently featuring the chemical weapons narrative. And again, lining up the children wrapped up, all lined up in a row. Yeah. And the average person in Middle England is going to look at that and say, oh, this is horrible. And here you have Bashar al-Assad's picture right next to gassing. So you see how incredible the suggestion is.
Juxtaposition there. Now, one of the things that we're going to stress, of course, is we are certainly not saying that people haven't died. Certainly a number of people and indeed many children have died. What we're getting at in the programme today is what the truth is, what the real circumstances are of how they died and indeed how many died, because as we've already shown, 1,300 is being quoted there. The Guardian is talking about 1,400. Many of the papers in the articles are saying that 90 bodies have been seen. So there's a big...
Nothing has been independently verified. So we don't know how it happened and we don't know what happened. And as I said in a report, which I'll show you from Russia Today, which I did yesterday, that until you know how it happened and what happened, that anything is wild speculation.
Yeah.
And what we see is our media has already begun the trial against the Syrian government or the Assad regime, and they've found him guilty already.
Yeah.
Even though the evidence is not in, there's been no independent investigation. So this dovetails perfectly with the Foreign Office's policy, which we'll get to in a minute.
Okay. Well, we've got another headline here from the Times.
This is the Times, and as you can see, the photos of the children shrouded already, all wrapped up. And I don't know when this photo was taken, but an act of barbarism. So this is basically showing the context of this headline would be the Assad government. Assad condemned as Syrian chemical attack kills hundreds. That's the Times this morning.
Right.
That's from the
Now,
Rupert Murdoch Press.
One of the things that is in my mind at the moment is that if you use these weapons, you end up with contaminated bodies. The body fluid is contaminated. Mm-hmm. Now, we can expect very brave medical people to handle victims, and they accept the risk to themselves, but we're not getting reports of one or two or tens of medical staff succumbing to secondary contamination from the bodies, and as is the custom, these bodies will be interred very quickly.
And not only that, Brian, the level of rockets and chemical ammunitions that they're saying took place, and the scale of the people afflicted, would mean you would have to evacuate a very large portion
and very quickly
of the city, and that's not happened. People are just walking in and doing whatever. So that's very suspect.
Somebody said to me this morning that they believe that the UN team were only about 15 minutes away from the actual site of this attack.
That's
Can
correct.
you confirm that?
That's correct. Yeah. Well, depending on traffic.
Right.
But 15 might be 15 miles. I'm not sure. But within the vicinity, checked into their hotel only 2 days ago. So, of course, a lot of people are scratching their heads, reasonable people are scratching their heads and saying, what would be the logic of launching a chemical weapons attack right as the UN weapons inspection team arrive to investigate in Syria?
It does not stack up.
Of course not.
Even if you are totally content that Assad is an evil man, he's certainly not a fool from what we see. But what does he gain by launching a chemical attack now that the UN teams are in the country? It simply doesn't stack up.
He gains nothing, but the opposition gains everything.
Yeah.
Either way. But the next thing I'm going to show you is from the Times, and this is very interesting. Now, what you're seeing a lot of, and this is part of the way propaganda and mixed messaging occurs in the media. We have the bottom of this center spread says,
We've got a highlight of it.
yes, it says horror video is no fake, but cannot tell the full story. That's not saying very much, is it, about the authenticity of video? It's saying more about the authenticity of the video.
Well, it raises a question which you would presume initially is not there. So who talked about fake videos? Suddenly the papers are talking about fake videos, and it's sorry, I'm not sure which this one is.
It's the Times. This is the Times.
Sorry.
So that leads us to the next one, Brian, which is just next to that. Ignore the conspiracists. We must find out the truth. And again, that is the follow-up. So you can see how the messaging works in media here. So they've already jumped in wanting to cut off the conspiracists at the past. And in the conspiracists, they've listed Russian media, though they haven't been completely specific about which outlets, but it could very well be the one I reported on yesterday morning with Russia Today. So they're saying that anything is a conspiracy theory if it doesn't dovetail with the foregone conclusion that we've given you here.
Yeah. Well, the Daily Mail today had 2 or 3 sentences referring to Russian media. And of course the Russian media was saying, well, actually, is it the rebels that have launched this attack? Which is a fairly reasonable question since we don't know the truth at the moment.
And I'll show you proof later that the rebels have in fact launched a chemical attack in Syria in March.
Right.
And that was gone right over the head of quite a few mainstream media outlets.
Okay, so What have we got here? Foreign Secretary welcomes new president of Syrian National Coalition.
Well, actually, this was a guy called Dr. Mohammed Najjar who was on Radio 4's Today program this morning, and I just wanted to highlight a quote. And his quote was, "The Syrian regime is probably going to use these weapons again and again." I'd like to know how he knows that. But really, the reason I'm showing this slide from William Hague from the Foreign Office is that Dr. Mohammed Najjar, who is generally identified in the media as being some kind of humanitarian doctor who takes humanitarian aid over to Syria and Aleppo in particular. In fact, he is working with the Syrian National Coalition, which is one of the major opposition groups, and in fact one of William Hague's favourite Syrian opposition groups. So I'm just pointing out from this press release back in July that Hague was really delighted about the new leadership of that organisation. And so the quote, again, was from Dr. Mohammed Najjar was, "The Syrian regime is probably going to use these weapons again and again." And he, contrary to most media outlets, in fact works for that opposition organisation.
Yeah, and if Hague's comfortable with him, we can be sure that he's on the right side.
Indeed, yeah. And then Malak Brown also came out today, also on Radio 4, I believe, this morning, saying the Assad regime are badly misreading the West if they think they can commit an atrocity and have it unresponded to. So all the usual suspects, as well as some that maybe we don't know quite so well, but all the usual suspects coming out and making the usual type of rhetoric. So
yeah, very brave people who never put themselves in the firing line. But a statistic which came into my mind this morning was, of course, we're talking about 1,300 people dying in Syria. 1,300 people were the number that died in the Staffordshire Hospital
That's right.
disaster in UK. And of course, David Cameron has protected the very man at the top of the organisation responsible ultimately for those deaths. So we live in an interesting organisation. In interesting times. I have a quote here from...
Yes, this is from Professor Fawaz Gergis from the London School of Economics, and this is just carrying on the point Mike had just earlier. What you see now in the propaganda blitz, in America we call this a full court press. I don't know what you would call it in England, but in the propaganda blitz, which is really revving up, you see this parade of experts who will be lined up and who will come to comment on the outrage and also the political situation. So here's another one from the LSE who's affiliated with the Council on Foreign Relations. And of course, we're going to go and look at, this is kind of how the propaganda works. You can see he's made some very reasonable statements here that this could be attack. We don't know why Assad would have done this, why a UN team is in Damascus, etc. That all sounds reasonable enough, Brian. And then we get down to, if Assad was intelligent, which he is not, he would allow the inspectors to visit the sites. But it's too dangerous to visit the sites. So, and then in the end he says, finally, this is the PSYOP, Brian, finally, the burden of truth lies on the Assad regime. When he says burden of truth, he means burden of proof. In the real world, it's burden of proof. And so he's saying the burden of proof lies on the accused and not, to prove his innocence, and not the accuser making the accusation. This is the essence of the narrative in the public discourse.
Yeah, and with Mr. Newmark, Conservative MP, when he was directly challenged by us on the telephone, where is the evidence to support your assertions that chemical weapons have been used in Syria? Well, he couldn't produce that evidence. So one rule for Assad, another rule for Britain and the West. Mike?
Sorry, Pat, just remind me, did you say that this Professor Gergis was a commentator or a writer for Foreign Policy magazine?
He is indeed,
Right,
and that's the Council on Foreign Relations
right,
publication.
So one of the things that I didn't include in the presentation today, but perhaps I should have, was an article, one of a number of articles in Foreign Policy magazine in the last couple of days, discussing a sudden amount of interest within Foreign Policy magazine on the whole chemical weapons issue. So they've almost preempted what happened yesterday with some commentary as a lead-in almost to what has happened.
And for those who are not familiar with the Council on Foreign Relations, what they are, they're sort of a think tank, a very influential think tank in Washington, D.C., and their responsibility is to disseminate, along with other organizations like the RAND Corporation and so forth, but to disseminate what is decided, predetermined foreign policy outcomes to the various branches of government. And their membership reads like a who's who of the U.S. State Department, including people like Hillary Clinton, Donald Rumsfeld, Dick Cheney.
So we're talking an embryonic world government system. These are the new leaders in waiting.
Yeah, well, they are the old leaders as well. They've been well established. So in Britain, the equivalent is Chatham House, equivalent type of organization. And of course, you have the Trilateral Commission. Above them, you have the Bilderberg Group, which is the kind of transatlantic confab which meets annually and sets an agenda of sorts. And then it's fettered out through those organizations like the CFR, who that professor from the LSE writes for.
And of course, Bilderberg was the very meeting in June this year that the British mainstream press and media simply didn't want to investigate with any form of professionalism or depth. Now, I believe we've got a video clip here.
Yeah, this was with the chemical attack in Syria happened on the other night. I think it was more than 24 hours ago, and I did this report yesterday from the BBC studios, funny enough, just yesterday. So we're going to play that.
So your report
for RT.
For Russia Today.
Yeah.
This with reporter and international affairs analyst Patrick Henningsen. Patrick, welcome to RT. Good to have you with us. All we have now, unconfirmed reports, but media sources quote Syrian rebels, and they put the number of killed to more than 1,000 now. Do you think they are a reliable source? And if it is confirmed the attack had taken place, do you think that the Syrian army could have carried out it?
Yeah, this is a very strange situation we find ourselves in here, where the Washington and London are putting the burden of proof on the Assad government in Damascus, when in fact the burden of proof should be on the accusers of this particular event. There's no evidence to suggest exactly what happened. We only have reports from, like you said, opposition activists in Damascus, so we don't know what happened, and we don't know how it happened. And until you discern those two things, it's going to be very difficult to jump to conclusions. Anything to this point is speculation.
Indeed, but would the Assad government resort to such an attack, knowing the UN investigators are in the country right now?
Well, it's funny. The Reuters report came out saying, obviously, that they cannot confirm independently these events. And Jane's International also reported to Reuters that it doesn't make any sense for the Syrian government to deploy a chemical weapon only miles away from the very hotel that the UN weapons inspectors have booked into only a few days ago. So they see this as a distraction. And of course, if we look at the history of this particular region, the Ghouta region, where the attack is said to take place, is very active with the al-Nusra front, and they've also been implicated in using makeshift chlorine bombs in Aleppo back in March. So there's a track record there. The evidence, unfortunately, does not stack up with these present claims of the Syrian government perpetrating these attacks.
Yeah, but it's still clear why fingers are being pointed at the government, at the Syrian government, because this is the government which has chemical weapons, don't they?
Yes, well, again, this is all, to this point, innuendo. This is why the UN team is in Damascus, to investigate these claims. Unfortunately, Washington and London and Paris drew a red line last year in 2012 that said if any side deploys chemical weapons, then that will be the pretext for a military intervention, either by NATO or some sort of coalition force backed by a UN resolution. And of course, who benefits from a chemical attack in Syria? Well, the opposition benefits. It's quite obvious. The Syrian government does not benefit. The opposition benefits because this will be the key to unlock the airstrikes and bombing campaign over Syria a la Libya. The opposition would like a Libyan-style coalition with NATO in order to force the regime out of power in Damascus. So they clearly benefit from any reports of a chemical attack in Syria.
And Al Arabiya puts the number of killed at more than 600, while other mainstream media talk about just dozens of victims. Why is there such a difference?
Well, I believe you have to also consider the source. I believe Al Arabiya has certain affiliations with certain Gulf states who might also have an interest in this particular conflict already. So you might see more exaggerated reports on certain sides. But again, there's no independent verification. This is simply anecdotal and innuendo to this point. So we can't, it's pure speculation exactly what has happened.
Sure.
So, but the timing of it is very suspect, I have to say.
Indeed. All right. Reporter and international affairs analyst Patrick Henningsen. Patrick, thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Well, what have you got really to add to that, Patrick?
Well, aside from the fact that this is an ongoing concern by mainly the US and British, and also the French are involved in this political campaign to pin a chemical weapons attack on the Assad government in Damascus in order to give them the justification for either to directly arm the opposition or to create a no-fly zone and do an aerial bombing campaign like we saw in Libya. And they need this chemical weapons narrative in order to make that stick or to get UN or international approval. So, but aside from that, again, it's about convincing the public that the burden of proof is on the accused to prove their innocence or prove the truth rather than on the accusers.
Yeah.
And of course, we see an incredible motivation for the Syrian opposition to stage a chemical attack in order to get the green light for the West to come in and help them in a coalition where we saw NATO had a coalition with many terrorist organizations in Libya, some of them Al-Qaeda affiliated. That was a military coalition between terrorists and insurgents and NATO. In order to have regime change in Libya, they wanted to do exactly the same thing here in Syria. And so there's a history of these various chemical attacks this year. We've seen about 3 or 4 alleged chemical attacks. This one was in March. I believe this one was on March 19th. And this was a big media event at the time. Some people may or may not remember, where they alleged that the Assad regime had launched a chemical weapons attack which killed 25 people in Aleppo in northern Syria. And of course, this is Reuters, one of the first to report this. And Reuters made a statement here whereby they said, go back one. Reuters said that we cannot verify or there's no suggestion that the opposition has access to such weapons. That's so that they've already planted the seed. This is part of the psychological operation on the public. Yeah. So this is Reuters, the biggest news service in the world, said there's no suggestion. And so what we did at 21st Century Wire was do a little bit of digging and translate a number of Arabic reports. And this is what we found, that there is a suggestion to show that the rebels or the terrorist Al-Qaeda affiliated groups did have access to this. So you're going to circle. Have you got a circle on this?
No. I can actually read part of this out.
Sure, yeah.
For our listeners anyway. Front Victory is experiencing the use of chlorine gas as a chemical weapon to Iraq after the withdrawal of the US military and in the context of the Jordanian-Saudi intelligence war in Iraq to undermine the Maliki government. Jordanian intelligence proceeded to facilitate the smuggling of chlorine gas from Jordan to the organisation known as Islamic State of Iraq, the first to use chlorine gas technology with the help of Jordanian intelligence and Saudi Arabia as a chemical weapon, a taboo issue in the media in the context of covering genocide. Given the fact that the first generation and second generation of the founders and staff of Front Victory...
Front Victory is affiliated with Al-Nusra, which is mainly a Saudi-backed terrorist organization, just to know.
Right. So they were hailed originally out of the Islamic State of Iraq organisation. They were the only ones among the insurgent Syrians who were schooled in this technique. In addition, the organisation Islamic State of Iraq deliberately, the English is a little bit suspect, deliberately to be the first instalments of his gunmen who were sent to Syria as of fall 2011.
Yes.
Weeks ago, Front Victory are reported to have begun manufacturing chlorine gas shells to be used in mortars and homemade rockets around Aleppo, utilising the stock from the chlorine gas plant. Note that the said missile was launched from an area, Kafir Dale, in the northwest of Aleppo. Its cargo of chlorine gas, with the effects that left it in the area of the explosion. 2 British chemists commented, and one of them said without hesitation the effects of chlorine gas combustion. The second said chemical or gaseous nature can be transformed from a liquid to a gas, but I cannot identify which, presumably. But this whole article is about using, I'm going to call it a low-grade chemical weapon. You're using chlorine gas,
Yes.
still highly dangerous, used in the First World War, but we are not talking sarin. And it's interesting that, to me, looking a bit back a bit with some of my military training and experience, we seem to be seeing effects in this latest chemical attack, which, to my mind, would mimic this type of chemical weapon, not sarin.
Exactly, and here we have a perfect example of a known terrorist group working within the Free Syrian Army confab, using chlorine chemical weapons in Syria, in northern Syria. People have died. This wasn't picked up or pursued at all by the media. Most of them just ignored it, although that particular article that we published, I believe the headline's Iraq 2.0, but I can't read the rest of the headline, but that article was read by hundreds of thousands of people.
Right.
And it was syndicated all over the web. But that brings us to this story, and let's backtrack a few months earlier. This story was ran by the Daily Mail. U.S.-backed plan to launch chemical weapons attack on Syria and blame it on Assad's regime. Leaked emails from the defense contractor refers to chemical weapons, saying the idea was approved by Washington. And Obama, of course, had issued a warning to the Syrian President Bashar al-Assad last month that the use of chemical warfare was totally unacceptable. So the Daily Mail ran this story by Louise Boyle on January 29th, 2013, and within 24 hours, this is what you get.
Okay, so something's been taken down here from the actual
Yes.
Mail one. Does this go on to the next one here?
Yes, it's still available online. You can see other agencies report it. This is Yahoo News in India, and they've got the meat of the Daily Mail story here. Why did the Daily Mail pull down this story? They didn't offer an official retraction. They just put it down the memory hole, and most likely there was a D-notice served or something like that.
So I'll just go back to that. So when we go looking for that, the details of that story on the Mail's own website, this is what we find. Sorry,
Yes.
the page you've requested does not exist or is no longer available. So that's a pretty strange coincidence, isn't
Yeah,
it?
considering what that article contained, which is unveiling a plot to plant chemical weapons in Syria and
In
blame
order to incriminate
Assad
Yeah.
government in order to get the justification for arms or a no-fly zone.
Yeah.
So, and where did this story originate? This story was originally leaked in what was called the Britam leaks. And you're going to bring the original story up here. This is a British defense contractor based in southwest London called Britam. And these were a leaked cache of emails alongside a number of Stratfor leaked emails. And you can see if you read this, read
out
this
to-
email. This is an email sent from one consultant to the other.
Right,
It's
so
very-
this is a look into the Britam Defence data leak files, and it says by Lee J on Saturday the 26th of January 2013 at 1:47:23 seconds AM. Phil, we've got a new offer. It's about Syria again. Qataris propose an attractive deal and swear the idea is approved by Washington. We'll have to deliver a CW to Homs. Now, CW is a chemical weapon. a Soviet origin G shell from Libya, similar to those that Assad should have. They want us to deploy our Ukrainian personnel that should speak Russian and make a video record. Frankly, I don't think it's a good idea, but the sums proposed are enormous. Your opinion? Now, this is either complete cuckoo land, or this is something very, very dark and devious going on in the background with some fairly shady people with big sums of money.
Well, a number of people have checked into that leak, and no one could come back and say that it was planted or false.
Yeah.
And also, it does fit perfectly with the story the Daily Mail ran, with the exact same contents. So that means the Daily Mail wouldn't print a story of that magnitude, put it out in public, unless, of course, they believed it was authentic.
Yeah.
So, but then they pulled it down. So
perhaps what we should do is ask the Daily Mail why they pulled it down, and I think we'll do that and report back to viewers and listeners what the response is, if any, of course.
Again, what we're saying here is look at these incidents and then look at the news that's come out today. And really you can get an idea of where this narrative is going, what the public campaign is. It's a campaign to convince the public and to sway public opinion that the Assad government is using chemical weapons on its own people.
Thereby he's crossed the red line, Obama's red line, therefore basically Britain and America can invade.
And I don't see any hard evidence to back up that accusation, and so therefore I think it's possible that the public is being misled once again for the same ends as we saw in Iraq.
Okay, and what have we got here? 21st Century Wire.
Well, amongst all the fanfare of this latest chemical weapons report, this story has been buried pretty much in the media. This is significant. President Musharraf, this was the president of Pakistan, he has been indicted and arrested for the murder, the assassination of former Prime Minister Benazir Bhutto in 2007. And so we've run the story, Resurrecting Osama. Musharraf arrest for Benazir Bhutto's assassination reignites the bin Laden question, because only weeks before she was assassinated, she was on David Frost's program, Around the World, which is broadcast on Al Jazeera globally. And she said that Omar Sheikh had assassinated and killed Osama bin Laden in circa 2001. Okay,
Right.
And 2 weeks later, she finds herself dead. She was doing an investigation to find out where the money and the organization was coming from for the terrorist groups in Pakistan along the border regions.
Yeah.
And one only has to look into this story a little bit to know that the trail which she was chasing would probably lead her directly to the CIA or some of these other entities that are involved in some way liaising or managing various operatives who have terrorist affiliations. So she was following the money, and she was following the organization, and she said Osama bin Laden, this was in 2007, she said Osama bin Laden was killed. This is before Obama's glorious re-election raid of the compound in Pakistan that secured his re-election. So clearly very, very explosive material Benazir Bhutto was unveiling there in public on the David Frost program, which is high profile, and she finds herself dead only a few weeks later.
Yeah.
And so they've arrested Musharraf. I believe that they've arrested him. They're going to try to take him, throw him under the bus essentially for this event, and in order to bury the bin Laden narrative, because it's people are starting to ask questions about, there was no photos and no videos released from the raid.
No body.
There's no body. So more and more people were asking questions. Where's the evidence that bin Laden was there at this glorious raid on May the 1st, 2011?
Yeah.
And there is no evidence.
And of course the significance is that if you begin to undermine the bin Laden story, then we begin to really start to question what we are being told is really global terrorism and who's behind it.
Yeah, that's the basis of the whole war on terror, and it's the basis of trillions of dollars and pounds and euros that's been spent on erecting the modern security state. And also it has everything to do with the NSA and the Ed Snowden affair as well.
Well, we're probably at the point then to move on here just with some other stories. The Mirror here, David Cameron urged to explain after The Guardian ordered to destroy secret spy evidence. So seems to be a little bit of a fight back in the press. But this one was quite interesting from The Independent. Nick Clegg, of course, is backing the Prime Minister on this one because they might disagree on other subjects, but when it comes to making sure the real truth is hidden, they're both in bed together. But if you read through this article, it actually says that David Cameron was coercing the editor of the Guardian. So I thought I'd just have a look up at the definition of coercion: the practice of forcing another party to act in an involuntary manner by use of intimidation or threats or some other form of pressure or force. So that's a very specific word being used by the press. So here is our Prime Minister. Many people, of course, trust him as in the same way as we might trust Tony Blair. Not at all. And these are the people directing foreign policy and trying to tell us what the truth is, whether it's in Syria or Northern Ireland or Afghanistan. So pretty incredible stuff. And we're told we're living in an increasingly dangerous world. So the Telegraph, quite interesting here, is that we've got the head of the British military, Mr. Houghton, Chief of Defence Staff, has said that the latest cuts are going to leave the forces cynical and detached. And I would say to people, do go and read this article, because what you'll be fascinated at is the language that this senior soldier is using. It's nothing to do with military language or the language of a professional soldier. We've got this new speak coming in. And he said, well, we've got to make these cuts, never mind that they're going to leave the armed forces more or less impotent. The cuts aren't important, it's how we manage the transition for our soldiers. Well, I decided I'd just have a quick look, and who do I see that he's friends with? Well, we couldn't find a better photograph than this. So I can say in 21 years in the military, it was fascinating to see how Britain's military were consistently betrayed by senior officers at high level who were simply prepared to follow the government policy in order to get their medals or knighthoods. And I think we've got another one going down the same path. So the truth is not out at the moment about the ultimate objective, which UK Column has reported repeatedly, is to reduce the British Army to circa 40,000 men, which will be to make us wholly reliant on a European army. Well, you covered this subject a little bit before, but it's an important one, Mike.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just highlighting, reminding people about this from yesterday. It's the next one that's the key thing, because really what this reflects is the effect that the Indian Central Bank's decision to start quantitative easing, and also the Fed's hints that it's going to withdraw quantitative easing in the United States, is having the effect that's having on the value of the rupee. Now, of course, countries, as Britain knows very well from the attractions of George Soros a number of years ago, whenever you do have floating exchange rates that are just left to the whim of so-called markets, this kind of thing is very easy to happen. So this guy's lost $6 billion out of his fortune. Well, I mean, maybe he can afford to lose it, but that it still, has a major impact on the Indian economy as a whole. It's the same with every nation around the world, where basically hedge funds and other speculators can destroy national economies, the value of the currency, in order to make a profit, and the value of a nation's currency becomes a form of profit for these speculators. There's no sovereignty under those circumstances, is there?
No. So
let's have the Bradbury pound, please.
Well, I've just also pick up here, it says at the end of it, it's talking about the value of his holdings, and it says a senior partner at Grant Thornton LLP in Mumbai is making comment. This is the other thing we see, that we've now got these global accountancy companies that are there piggybacking on the international bankers. And of course, the whole thing is sewn up very nicely, isn't it?
And this gentleman is only one of India has hundreds of thousands of millionaires and probably a few hundred billionaires to be conservative. So he is just the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah,
in
presumably
that story.
made on the backs of the average wage in India.
Most likely, because the average wage in India is very cheap.
Well, we've mentioned the Bradbury Pound. Now it's time to mention Glass-Steagall because, of course, yet another banking scandal has hit the news today. So first we had payment protection insurance on loans, then we had the interest rate swap scandal on business loans, and now we've got mis-selling credit card insurance. How many more mis-selling? I mean, mis-selling, it implies it's a kind of soft term. This is just blatant fraud. Let's call it what it is. How many more of these fraudulent events, scandals, these scams, these cons do we have to put up with before something is done about the banks? They need to be split up and heavily regulated. There's no other way. They are absolutely asset stripping people. Now, it has to be said that in these other scandals, people are either not being paid, they're not being given it, the compensation isn't being paid, or it's being paid extremely slowly. Most of the people that have been hit by the interest rate swap scandal, a lot of them have had businesses go out of business, go under as a result. They're not receiving the compensation in any kind of timely manner. The various media is reporting £1.3 billion compensation bill. I'll believe it when I see it. I don't see that money going out of the banks in any time soon.
Yeah. Okay, and what's Bloomberg got to say for itself here?
Well, I mean, they're really just pointing out that every month, just like in the UK with the Bank of England, where the Monetary Policy Committee meets and they issue the minutes and the markets react accordingly, and it's the same with the Fed and their equivalent committee, the Open Market Committee, is just Bernanke is just kind of faffing around. He can't decide. He knows that he has to wind in quantitative easing somehow. He doesn't really know how he's going to do it. He knows that if he does it, it's going to have a colossal impact on the financial system and therefore an impact on the real economy at some point. It's all a question of timing for him. And in the meantime, the markets and the financial press are really saying, just get on with it or make a decision either way. Actually, they don't want him to do it at all, but they're really now starting to get a bit impatient about the fact that he's sort of humming in hand. And this article is really just saying, that the other members of the committee were, quote, broadly comfortable with his strategy for this, the strategy of doing nothing. I just think that as with all these things, the longer you leave it, the worse it's going to be. And I think they intend to leave it for as long as possible in the full knowledge that the impact is going to be much worse when they finally do it.
Right. And, of course, news on Bradley Manning here.
Yeah, 35 years in prison. Not really much more to say about that, except that WikiLeaks believes that this sentence is what they call a, quote, strategic victory, because they believe that Manning will be eligible for parole in 9 years or so. So, well, we'll see that. If that happens.
Well, I thought it was an interesting period because you could say 30 years, it just takes it beyond release of official secrets that come out at 30-year intervals. On the other hand, if you're an optimist, then 10 years something could have changed in American politics, which mean that he's got a much stronger case.
Yeah, I don't see that happening, actually.
Yeah. Now, we're going to end with just a few general items. Mike, you picked up on this one, which, of course, another tragic case involving British social services, really.
Yeah, again, I don't really want to say too much about it. If anybody's interested, they can read the article on the BBC. But we have come across a number of these cases over the years and have been quite closely involved with one or two of them, where mothers, as a last act of desperation, grab the child and run rather than see it being taken away by social services. I cannot criticize any mother that does this. I have huge sympathy for them under the circumstances. But of course, it's very likely that they'll be discovered and the child will still be taken and she's going to end up in prison if she's lucky.
Yeah.
So, another tragedy.
And we have seen cases, of course, where these alerts have been put out in local and national newspapers for mothers when social services absolutely know where the mother is. So this is designed to ramp up the evidence against them. Yeah, well, cock up or conspiracy, what is it?
Yeah, so this is an interesting post on politics.co.uk. Robert Barrington here just sort of drawing attention to the lobbying bill. Now we know that the lobbying scandal, David Cameron said a few years ago that this was the next big scandal that was going to come along. So they're producing a bill in Parliament, and what this article is really pointing out is that the bill that is proposed is itself a complete cock-up, and it really isn't going to solve the problem. And he's saying, well, you know, you're sort of rushing this through, that perhaps it needs to be thought about a bit better. But I'm saying that perhaps it's deliberately being rushed through in this way because their intention is not actually to stop. They're going to put a piece of legislation through which really doesn't prevent any kind of lobbying at all, but merely gives a veneer of oh, well, we've done something about this now.
Yeah, well, it's my view, and correct me if you don't agree with it, but I think the objective at the moment is to completely destroy the public's confidence in the political system. We've already got people, well, I think MPs are at rock bottom, well, possibly just above judges and the legal profession, but basically we're now seeing that politics across the board is being smashed to pieces. And where does this take us to? It takes us to people not voting, and it takes us probably to another coalition where effectively we're in a one-party political system. Mm-hmm. So I think that's what this is about.
There's also an element of the restriction of freedom of speech in that story as well, buried in there.
Absolutely. Now, we picked up on another couple of articles from the Mirror. It's quite interesting. Some of our listeners and viewers have suggested that we ought to focus on the mainstream media, and in particular the people who are pumping out material which is there for us to absorb. And we decided today we'd have a look at this article, Princess Diana's death, being raked over, once again shames us all. The mentalists won't let her lie. So this is anybody that believes that we were not told the truth. Brian Reed here, the journalist, is really having a go. And you do a tiny bit of research. This is another one of his articles, Pulp Friction, why only British journalists ask hard questions of celebrities. Well, doesn't that say it all, that the journalists are not there getting stuck into the questions of the truth in Syria or deaths in the NHS or how the police are losing their jobs to private security firms? He thinks that the press is being tough if they ask tough questions of pop stars and celebrities.
And perfect example of this, Brian, I'm holding here a copy of today's Mirror, and that's what you see on the newsstand. But if you go to the Mirror's website, what you see is Simon Cowell on the front page.
Who's that?
He's a pop Svengali type. But you have to dig to find the Syria article, which is on the front page of their tabloid. So I find it incredible. It's all celebrity news on the Mirror's website. You have to drill down one or two layers to get to the actual world news.
The gore goes on the front page to sell the newspaper, and then the rubbish.
Yes.
Simon Cowell's we simply will not mention on the programme because he's not worth it. Here's the same gentleman, Brian Reed, so I hope he's watching, or a friend or colleague is watching, and maybe he'd like to talk to us direct. But here he is stirring up the angst over Gibraltar. Why do we want a haven for tax exiles, Tory postal voters, winter fuel payment claimants? Well, all pretty rude stuff, designed to get people at, in my opinion, each other's throats. Mm-hmm. So we've got Gibraltar as a nice distraction whilst we've got massive economic problems in Spain and Britain. Let's have a minor incident to get them in. And here's the man. This is one of the many articles on the internet. So he's here with his pint of beer. A big football fan. Well, do we need to say more, really? Okay, well, some of his colleagues have been doing something of value. David Collins here picked up on a very interesting story which I'm going to encourage people to look at and to research themselves. This is about the abuse of boys in the penal system some years ago, Medhamsley. And I'm going to draw attention to this man, Bill Maloney from Pie and Mash Films. And this is the YouTube page, which has got his full documentary on this abuse. So the Mirror trying to appears make out that it's picked up on this story. Bill Maloney has been interviewing, researching and shouting from the rooftops about this abuse. So do have a look at the Mirror story, but then go and have a look at the Medemsley Heroes, the full documentary by Bill Maloney.
That film, Adam Rickwood and the Medemsley Heroes, I watched that, and that is a heavy piece of filmmaking.
Yeah.
Very emotional.
Because the victims are there telling you how it was.
And I recommend, if you haven't seen Adam Rickwood and the Medemsley Heroes, you can watch it on YouTube, and I'll tell you, you don't need to go to the cinema to see drama. When you see real life drama like what Bill Maloney has depicted here, I think it's a masterful work, documentary work.
And it's what the mainstream press and media should be doing instead of reporting on, sorry, who was that gentleman you mentioned just now? I've forgotten his name now.
Kyman Sowell.
Howells. Simon.
Towell.
Well, this is a picture really of us, the public, or it's how the government sees us. Just found it quite interesting that we're suddenly back on, we need to be vaccinated, we need to be pumping ourselves full of flu vaccines. So here's the latest scare, H7N7 bird flu strain. It could pose a threat to humans. It's been found in chickens in China. Haven't we heard all this before?
Yeah, this is the latest in the line of potential marketing, forward marketing campaigns for possibly a vaccine. Or it could just be, Brian, that stories like this are placed at this time of the year to ramp up people's flu vaccines, which will be coming up in September and October.
Right, thank you for that, because this is the next one that's here in today's press. Of course, it concerns me more than it concerns you. Give over 50s a winter flu jab to cut deaths from heart attack. So based on the research, I think it's by some Australian outfit, we're going to have more jabs in order to stop us having heart attacks. This is madness, isn't it?
This is, I did my own research on the flu jab a couple of years ago, and I did just a basic survey amongst friends and family of anybody who's had the actual flu jab, and every single person who did said that they were violently sick for up to 10, 14,
or had the flu.
Had the flu for 7 to 14 days. It's just in my immediate circle.
Yeah.
And I don't know if anyone's done a study like this before. But so yeah, you will get sick. You will be sicker with the flu vaccine, as far as what I've seen in my
reading and research.
My own reading and research, so that's an interesting product.
Anybody's interested in this subject, go and have a look for Christina England on the internet, who's done tremendous research work into the dangers of vaccines. So this is a fairly typical article on a typical subject, but we've got people at the moment saying that we've got to control immigration into Britain, which seems to be quite sensible. The NHS can't cope, schools can't cope, the roads can't cope, nothing can cope, but at the moment we've got free immigration from across the world, but particularly the EU, and now here we are with Labour, Ms Abbott stirring up attention to this subject. So I think this is to deflect the public off the true state of the country.
It's that, and also Labour needs to import voters or future voters for future, if they have a chance of winning a future election. So they see the immigrants as it's
Labour voters.
It's a form of patronage.
And as we've said before, if anybody's squeamish about this, we talk to everybody and anybody and everybody on this subject. And long-term immigrants in this country are as concerned about the present open border policy as anybody else. So the second article that just came up quickly there, I found this very interesting. So we've got the government opening the borders to Romania and Bulgaria. And now all of a sudden, well, this young lady, I'm happy to believe the story is true, can't get into medical school. So where's she going to be trained? She's going to be trained in Romania. And then the whole article is a travel advert for why you should go and live in Romania.
Doing a site swap, apparently.
Well, maybe I'm just suspicious. And this one is a classic because Cameron at the moment is crowing that he's actually doing something to stop online porn. Many would question that, and in particular with his close relationship with senior officials from Google. But what's been interesting is the people that are put forward to comment on what sort of controls there should be. So the Mail reported on this subject, several other papers did, but these were two people who are being put forward as being the people who should be advising us. So a lady, real name Abby Lee, pen name Zoe Margolis, she initially started writing about her life as a sexually active young woman in London. And basically she's a blogger, but now she's in the national press. And we've got another one here. This is Lady Belle de Jour, very intelligent lady, PhD as a researcher into medical subjects, but also, according to the information in the national media and Wikipedia here, spent some time as a call girl.
Yeah, and some of these, their escapades online under their nom de plume or blogger names are incredibly exaggerated. In some cases, they don't take part in any of the things which they actually wrote about.
Right.
So, but yet the reputation is built up and the mystique is built up.
But our national press think that these are the right people to act. They don't go and talk to ordinary mums and dads in the street to say, what do you think? They go and talk to an ex-cool girl and a sexually active young woman in London.
Yes.
Well done, Britain's national press. And a couple of things on how the country is changing at the moment. This one, quite interesting, The Independent talking about new police commissioners getting the authority to hire and fire prison governors. So that would start to bring the whole of the police and prison system under one hand. So I personally think this is pretty dangerous stuff. Maybe we get a bit more of an idea. This is an amazing story in The Independent here about a woman who was a problem prisoner, but basically she was kept almost in solitary confinement for 5 years at HM Prison Bronzefield. Now, in that story is one name which isn't commented on in any way, except that this is the company actually running the prison, Sodexo. And I would encourage people to go and have a look at this firm. To my mind, this is another sort of Serco come G4.
Sodexo really started off, their biggest operation was a catering operation.
Yeah.
They're essentially a big catering company who's gotten into prisons. That's interesting. So
Probably through the food.
So they get a good deal on the food.
Can I just read? It says here, Sodexo Justice Services, formerly Calix, has been running justice services which change lives for the better since 1993. We do this in over 120 sites across the world, including the total operation of 4 prisons in the UK. We have a reputation for delivering excellence, ethical, innovative and rehabilitative services which provide comprehensive solutions to address our clients' requirements. So these are the people who are going to be in control of you if you're in prison. Let's have a look at the chief executive here. Debbie White, a woman worth watching. So her name's all over the internet. What is her background into caring for prisoners? I'm really not sure. But something that concerns me about this company is this is what they're working on, the Better Tomorrow plan. And this company is working to change the world, the environment and the way people think and behave. Pretty dangerous stuff.
Yeah, I know. I won't mention that.
Okay.
But I know Sodexo from the. I did some casual work for Sodexo in the 90s, but we were just serving
Catering
food.
company.
We were serving food, so I'm quite shocked that they're into this.
Okay,
this
well,
new
I'm just going to
industry.
end on this note. Turn away if you're of weak disposition. But here he is, Tony Blair, and the Telegraph has got an interesting story saying that he's advertising for a head of education at his charity, the Tony Blair Faith Foundation. And the paper then flags up that there's some pretty dodgy people who've been donating to Mr. Blair's charity. So presumably he's there smiling at events in Syria, and of course he's the man tasked with peace in the Middle East, isn't he?
Well, he's in charge of the interfaith effort to, who knows what that's all about, perhaps to
One world faith. Is what it's about. But we'll
harmonize
say-
everybody into a one world government. But yeah, he's head of the quartet.
Yeah.
So he's viceroy or emperor of Jerusalem at the moment. So he's got his offices there in Jerusalem, and he's supposed to represent the UN, the US, Russia, and the EU in the peace process
Right.
in the Middle East. But of course, he's been spending most of his time working for his banker bosses.
Chums.
Yeah, is it J.P. Morgan?
Indeed, yeah.
J.P. Morgan, and also organizing contracts and using his position to get deals done with the Palestinian Authority and any other money that's laying around on the table, unclaimed. Tony Blair's doing quite well, and I love that picture that you put up because as he gets older, he seems to, I think he's had some work done. Has he had some work done?
Well, he's had a bit of sunshine.
His eyes are sort of gone
More
up.
demonic than ever. Yeah.
His smile looks more demonic than ever.
Yeah.
It's incredible.
Okay, well, we better end there, and I'm sorry to end on such a serious and unpleasant note. But thank you very much for joining us. Do stay with us as we continue to cover events in Syria. Why are these so important? Not only because of the seriousness of them for the people of Syria, but of course, if we are indeed in the situation where the British government is lying to the British people about events in the Middle East, then we need to find out what the truth is. And ultimately, we need to deal with people in government. Okay, if you'd like to donate, please do. And also, by the weekend, we'll have some new T-shirt adverts on the UK Column site. So we need your help. If you like what we're doing, please consider making a subscription or a donation. Thank you very much. Goodbye.